He reached for it with his right hand, the one he'd cut on the bud bottle. Without even thinking about it, the torch he continued to hold on the side of his head with his uninjured left. He seized something that felt like cool, fur-covered jelly. The thing let go of his ankle at once, and Pete caught just a glimpse of expressionless black eyes. Shark's eyes, eagle's eyes, before it sank the needle nest of its teeth into his clutching hand, tearing it wide open along the perforation of the previous cut. The agony was like the end of the world. The thing's head, if it had one, was buried in the hand, ripping and tearing and digging deeper. Blood flew in splattery fans as Pete tried to shake it off, stippling the snow and snow-dusty tarp and the dead woman's parka. Droplets flew into the fire and hissed like fat in a hot skillet. Now the thing was making a ferocious, chittering sound. Its tail, as thick as moray eel's body, wrapped around Pete's thrashing arm, endeavoring to keep it still. Pete made no conscious decision to use the torch, because he'd forgotten he had it. His only thought was to tear the terrible biting thing off his right hand with his left. At first, when it caught fire and flared up, as hot and bright as the roll of newspaper, he didn't understand what was happening. Then he screamed, partly in fresh pain and partly in triumph. He bolted to his feet for the time being, at least his bulging knee did not hurt at all, and swung his burdened right arm at one of the lean-to support posts in a great sweeping roundhouse. There was a crunch, and the chittering sound was replaced by muffled squealing. For one endless moment, the knot of teeth planted in his hand burrowed in deeper than ever. Then they loosened and the burning creature fell free and landed on the frozen ground. Pete stamped on it, felt it writhe under his heel, and was filled with one moment of pure and savage triumph before his outraged knee gave away entirely and his leg bent inside out. The tendons tore loose. He fell heavily on his side, face to face with Becky's lethal hitchhiker, unaware that the lean-to was beginning to shift. The pole he'd struck with his arm, bowing slowly outward. For a moment, the weasel thing's rudiment of a face was 3 inches from Pete's own. Its burning body flapped against his jacket. Its black eyes boiled. It had nothing so sophisticated as a mouth. But when the bulge on the top of the body unhinged, revealing its teeth, Pete screamed at it, "No! No! No!" and battered it into the fire, where it writhed and made its frantic, monkey-like chittering. His left foot swung in a short arc as he shoved the thing farther into the fire. The tip of his boot struck the tilting pole, which had decided to hold the lean-to up a little longer. This was one outrage too many, and the pole snapped, dropping half of the tin roof. A second or two later, the other pole snapped as well. The rest of the roof fell into the fire, sending out a whirling squirt of sparks. For a moment, that was all. Then the fallen sheet of rusty tin began to heave itself up and down, as if it were breathing. A moment later, Pete crawled out from under. His eyes were glazed, his skin was patsy with shock. The left cuff of his jacket was on fire. He stared at this for a moment with his legs still under the fallen roof from the knees down. Then raised his arms in front of his face, drew in a deep breath, and blew out the flames, rising from his jacket like a giant birthday candle. Approaching from the east was the buzz of a snowmobile engine. Jonesy, whatever was left of him. The cloud. Pete didn't think it would show him any mercy. This was no day for mercy in the Jefferson tract. He would hide, but the voice advising him that was distant, unimportant. One thing was good. He had an idea. He had finally quit drinking. He raised his savaged right hand in front of his face. One finger was gone, presumably down the thing's gullet. 2 others lay in the swoon of severed tendons. He saw that reddish gold stuff already growing along the deepest slashes. the ones the monster had inflicted, and the one he'd done himself, crawling back into the Scout after the beer. He could feel a kind of fizzy sensation that whatever that stuff was, fed on his flesh and blood. Pete suddenly felt that he couldn't die soon enough. The sound of the machine guns in the west had stopped, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. And, as if the thought had summoned it, a huge explosion hammered the day, blotting out the wasp whine of the oncoming snowmobile and everything else. Everything but the busy fizz in his hand that was. In his hand, the crud was dining on him, the way the cancer had killed his father had dined on the old man's stomach and lungs. Pete ran his tongue over his teeth, felt gaps where some of them had fallen out. He closed his eyes and waited. Part 2. Grey Boys. A ghost comes out of the unconscious mind. To grope my cell, it moans to be reborn. The figure at my back is not my friend. The hand upon my shoulder turns to horn. Theodore Rothko. Kurtz and Underhill. The only thing in the ops area was a little beer and deer store called Gosselin's Country Market. Kurt's cleaners began arriving there shortly after the snow began to fall. By the time Kurtz himself got there at 10:30, support was starting to appear. They were getting a grip on the situation. The store was designated Blue Base. The barn, the adjacent stable, dilapidated but still standing, and the corral had been designated Blue Holding. The first detainees had already been deposited there. Archie Perlmutter, Kurt's new aide-de-camp. His old one, Calvert, had died of a heart attack not 2 weeks before. Goddamn bad timing. Had a clipboard with a dozen names on it. Perlmutter had arrived with both a laptop computer and a Palm Pilot, only to discover that electronic gear was currently FUBAR in the Jefferson Tract. Fucked up beyond all recognition. The top 2 names of the clipboard were Gosselin's, the old man who ran the store, and his wife. More on the way, Perlmutter said. Kurtz gave the names of a pearly clipboard a cursory look, then handed it back. Big recreational vehicles were being parked behind them. Semi-trailers were being jacked and leveled. Light poles were going up. When night came, this place would be as well lighted as Yankee Stadium at World Series time. "We missed 2 guys by this much," Perlmutter said, and held up his right with a thumb and forefinger, a quarter of an inch apart. They came in for supplies, principally beer and hot dogs. Perlmutter's face was pale, with a wild pink rose blooming in each cheek. He had to raise his voice against the steadily increasing noise level. Helicopters were coming in 2 by 2 and landing on the blacktop lane that eventually made its way out to Interstate 95, where you could go north toward one dull town, Presque, or south toward any number of other dull towns, Bangor and Derry for starters. The helicopters were fine as long as their pilots didn't have to depend on all the sophisticated navigational equipment, which was also FUBAR. "Did those fellows go in or out?" Kurtz asked. "Back in," Perlmutter said. He could not quite bring himself to meet Kurtz's eyes. He looked everywhere but, "There's a woods road," Gosselin says. "It's called the Deep Cut Road. It's not on the standard maps, but I have a Diamond International Paper Survey map that shows." "That's fine. Either they'll come back out or stay in. Either way, it's fine." More helicopters, some unshipping their .50s now, that they were safely away from the wrong eyes. This could end up being as big as Desert Storm, maybe bigger. "You understand your mission here, Pearlie, don't you?" Perlmutter most definitely did. He was new. He wanted to make an impression. He was also jumping up and down like a spaniel that smells lunch, Kurtz thought. And he did it all without making an eye contact. "So my job is," triune in nature. Triune, Kurds thought. Triune, how about that? I am to A. Intercept, B. Turn intercepted persons over to medical, and C. Contain and segregate pending further orders. Exactly, that's... But sir, beg your pardon, sir, we don't have any doctors here yet. Only a few corpsmen and... Shut up, Kurds said. He didn't speak loudly, but half a dozen men in unmarked green coveralls, they were all wearing unmarked green coveralls, including Kurds himself, hesitated as they went double-timing on their various errands. They glanced towards where Kurds and Perlmutter were standing, then got moving again, triple time. As for Perlmutter, the roses in the cheeks died at once. He stepped back, putting another foot between himself and Kurds. If you ever interrupt me again, Pearlie, I will knock you down. Interrupt me second time, I'll put you in the hospital. Do you understand? With what was clearly a tremendous effort, Perlmutter brought his gaze up to Kurds' face, to Kurds' eyes. He snapped off a salute so crisp it almost crackled with static electricity. "Sir, yes, sir!" "You can quit that one too, you know better." And when Perlmutter's gaze began to drop, "Look at me when I'm talking to you, laddie." Very reluctantly, Perlmutter did so. His complexion was now leaden. Although the noise of the helicopters lined up along the road was cacophonous, it somehow seemed very quiet right here, as if Kurds travelled in his own weird air pocket. Perlmutter was convinced that everyone was watching them and that they could all see how terrified he was. Some of it was his boss's new eyes, the cataclysmic absence in those eyes, as if there were really no brain behind them at all. Perlmutter had heard of the 1,000-yard stare, but Kurds seemed to go on for 1,000,000 yards, maybe light years. Yet somehow Perlmutter held Kurds' gaze, looking into the absence. He was not off to a good start here. It was imperative that the slide be stopped before it could become an avalanche. "All right, good. Better anyway." Kurds' voice was low, but Perlmutter had no problem hearing him despite the overlapping chanter of the helicopters. "I'm going to say this to you just once, and only because you're new to my service, and you clearly don't know your asshole from your pie hole. I have been asked to run a FUCA operation here. Do you know what a FUCA is?" "No," Perlmutter said. It caused him almost physical pain not to be able to say, "No, sir." According to the Irish, who as a race have never entirely crawled from the bath of superstition in which their mothers gagged them, a FUCA is a phantom horse and carries them away on its back. I use it to mean an operation which is both covert and wide open. A paradox, Perlmutter. The good news is that we have been developing contingency plans for just this sort of clusterfuck since 1947, when the Air Force first recovered the sort of extraterrestrial artifact now known as a flashlight. The bad news is that future is now, and I have to face it with guys like you in support. Do you understand me, Buck? Yes. I hope so. What we have got to hear, Perlmutter, is to go in fast and hard and utterly FUCA. We are going to do as much as dirty work we have to and come out as clean as we can. Clean, yes, Lord, and smiling. Kurds bared his teeth with a brief smile of such brutally satiric intensity that Perlmutter felt a little like screaming. Tall and stoop-shouldered, Kurds had the build of a bureaucrat. Yet something about him was terrible. You saw some of it in his eyes, sensed some of it in the stir. Prim away he held his hands in front of him, and those weren't the things that made him scary. That made the men call him Old Creepy Kurds. Perlmutter didn't know exactly what the really scary thing was, and didn't want to know. What he wanted right now, the only thing he wanted, was to get out of this conversation with his ass on straight. Who needed to go 20 or 30 miles west to make contact with an alien species? Perlmutter had one standing right here in front of him. Kurt's lips snapped shut over his teeth. On the same page, are we? Yes. Saluting the same flag, pissing the same latrin? Yes. How are we going to get out of this, Pearly? Clean. What for? And how else? For one more terrible second, he didn't know. Then it came to him. Smiling, sir. Call me sir again and I'll knock you down. I'm sorry, Perlmutter whispered. He was too. Here came a school bus, rolling slowly up the road with its offside wheels in the ditch, and canted almost to the tip-over point so it could get past the helicopters. Millie Knockett's school department was written on the side. Big black letters against a yellow background. Commandeered bus. Owen Underhill and his men inside. The A-team. Perlmutter saw it and felt better. At different times both men had worked with Underhill. You'll have doctors by nightfall, Kurt said. All the doctors you need, check? Check. As he walked toward the bus, which stopped in front of Gosselin's single gasoline pump, Kurtz looked at his pocket watch. Gosh, how the time flew when you were having fun. Perlmutter walked with him, but all the Cocker Spaniel spring had gone out of Perlmutter's step. For now, Archie, eyeball them, smell them, listen to their tall tales, and document any Ripley you see. You know about Ripley, I assume? Yes. Good. Don't touch it. God, no! Perlmutter exclaimed, then flushed. Kurtz smiled thinly. This one was no more real than his shark's grin. Excellent idea, Perlmutter. You have breathing masks. They have arrived. 12 cartons of them, and more on the... Good. Do you want Polaroids of the Ripley? We need mucho documentation. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, so on and so forth. Got it? Yes. And none of our guest getaway, right? Absolutely not. Perlmutter was shocked by the idea and looked it. Kurt's lips stretched. The thin smile grew and once more became the shark's grin. Those empty eyes looked through Perlmutter, looked all the way to the center of the earth for all Perlmutter knew. He found himself wondering if anyone would leave Blue Base when this was over. Except Kurtz, that was. Carry on, Citizen Perlmutter. In the name of the government, I order you to carry on. Archie Perlmutter watched Kurtz continue on toward the bus, where Underhill, a squat of a man, was climbing off. Never in his life had he been so utterly delighted to see a man's back. Hello, boss, Underhill said. Like the rest, he wore plain green coverall, but like Kurtz, he also wore a sidearm. Sitting in the bus were roughly 24 men, most of them just finishing an early lunch. What have you got back here, Buck? Kurtz asked. At 6'6", he towered over Underhill, but Underhill probably outweighed him by 70 pounds. Burger King. We drove through. I didn't think the bus would fit, but Yoda said it would, and he was right. Want a Whopper? They are probably a little on the cold side by now, but there must be a microwave in there someplace. Underhill nodded toward the stove. I'll pass. Cholesterol's not looking good these days. Groin okay? 6 years before, Kurtz had suffered a serious groin pull while playing racquetball. This had indirectly led to their only disagreement. Not a serious one. Owen Underhill judged, but with Kurtz it was hard to tell. Behind the man's patented game face, thoughts came and went at near light speed. Agendas were constantly being rewritten, and emotions were turning on a dime. There were people, quite a few of them actually, who thought Kurtz was crazy. Owen Underhill didn't know if he was or not, but he knew you wanted to be careful around this one. As the Irish might put it, Kurtz said, "Me groin's fine." He reached between his legs, gave his balls a burlesque yank, and favored Owen with that teeth-baring grin. Good. And you been okay? Me groin's fine, Owen said, and Kurtz laughed. Now coming up the road, rolling slowly and carefully, but having an easier time than the bus, was a brand new Lincoln Navigator with 3 orange-clad hunters inside. Hefty boys, all three, gawking at the helicopters and the double-timing soldiers in their green coveralls. Gawking at the guns mostly. Vietnam comes to northern Maine, praise God. Soon they would join the others in the holding area. Half a dozen men approached as the navigator pulled up behind the bus, with its stickers reading Blue Devil Pride, and this vehicle stops at all RR crossings. 3 lawyers or bankers with their own cholesterol problems and fat stock portfolios, lawyers or bankers pretending to be good old boys under the impression of which they soon be disabused that they were still in America at peace. Soon they would be in the barn or the corral if they carved fresh air, where their Visa cards would not be honored. They would be allowed to keep their cell phones. They wouldn't work this far up in the valley wags, but hitting redial might keep them amused. You plugged in tight? Kurtz asked. Well, I think so, yes. Still a quick study? Owen shrugged. How many people in the blue zone together, Owen? We estimate 800, no more than 100 in zones Prime A and Prime B. That was good, assuming no one slipped through. In terms of possible contamination, a few slips wouldn't matter. The news, at least so far, was good on that score. In terms of information management, however, it would not be good at all. It was hard to ride a Fuka horse these days. Too many people with video cams, too many TV station helicopters, too many watching eyes. Kurtz said, Come inside the store, they're setting me up a bago. But it's not here yet. Un momento, Underhill said and dashed up the steps of the bus. When he came back down, he had a grease-spotted Burger King sack in his hand and a tape recorder over his shoulder on a strap. Kurtz nodded toward the bag. That stuff will kill you. You're starring in the War of the Worlds and you're worried about high cholesterol. Behind them, one of the newly arrived mighty hunters was saying he wanted to call his lawyer, which probably meant he was a banker. Kurtz led Underhill into the store. Above them, the flashlights were back, running their glow over the bottoms of the clouds, jumping and dancing like animated characters in a Disney cartoon. Old man Gosselin's office smelled of salami, cigars, beer, must-roll and sulfur. Either farts or boiled eggs. Kurtz reckoned, maybe both. There was also a smell, faint but discernible, of ethyl alcohol. The smell of them, it was everywhere up here now. Another man might have been tempted to ascribe that smell to a combination of nerves and too much imagination, but Kurtz had never been overburdened with either. In any case, he did not believe 100 or so square miles of forest land surrounding Gosselin's country market had much future as a viable ecosystem. Sometimes you just had to sand a piece of furniture down to the bare wood and start again. A cardboard box with Chem, US, 10 units stamped on it lay within. Good for Perlmutter. Kurtz took it out and opened it. Inside were a number of small plastic masks, the transparent sort that fitted over the mouth and nose. He tossed one to Underhill and put on one himself, quickly adjusting the elastic straps. Are these necessary? Owen asked. We don't know and don't feel privileged. In another hour, everyone's going to be wearing them except for the John Q's in the holding area, that is. Underhill donned his mask and adjusted the straps without further comment. Kurtz sat behind the desk with his head leaning back against the latest piece of OSHA paperwork, post-it or die, taped to the wall behind him. Do they work? Underhill's voice was hardly muffled at all. The clear plastic did not fog with his breathing. It seemed to have no pores or filters, but he found he could breathe easily enough. They work on Ebola, they work on anthrax, they work on the new super cholera. Do they work on Ripley? Probably. If not, we are fucked, soldier. In fact, we are fucked already. But the clock is running and the game is on. There's no need for you to hear all of it, but you ought to taste, I think. Kurtz nodded, making a spinning motion in the air with his forefinger, like an ump signaling a home run, Owen thought, and leaning back further in Gosselin's chair. Underhill, unslung the tape recorder, set it on the desk facing Kurtz, and pushed play. A toneless robot voice said, "NSA radio intercept multiband 62914A44. This material is classified top secret. Time to intercept 0627 hours. November 14th, 2001. Intercept recording begins after the tone. If you're not rated Security Clearance 1, please press stop now." "Please," Kurtz said, nodding. "Good. That'd stop most the unauthorized personnel, don't you think?" There was a pause, a 2-second beep, then a young woman's voice said, "1, 2, 3. Please don't hurt us." A 2-second silence, and then a young man's voice said, 5, 7, 11. "We are helpless. Please don't hurt us. We are helpless." "By God, it's that Berlitz language lesson from the great beyond," Kurtz said. "Recognize the voices?" Underhill asked. Kurtz shook his head and put a finger on his lips. 13, 17, 19. In Clinton's Arkansas accent, the last one came out 19. "There is no infection here." Another 2-second pause, and then Tom Brokaw spoke from the tape recorder. 23, 27, 29. "We are dying. We are dying." Underhill pushed stop. "In case you wonder, the first voice is Sarah Jessica Parker, an actress. The second is Brad Pitt." "Who's he?" "An actor?" "Uh-huh." Each pause is followed by another voice. All the voices would be recognizable to large segments of people in this area. There's Alfred Hitchcock, Paul Harvey, Garth Brooks, Tim Sample. He's a main-style humorist, very popular, and hundreds of others, some of which we haven't identified. Hundreds of others? How long did the intercept last? Strictly speaking, it's not an intercept at all, but a clear band transmission since 0800 hours, which means a bunch of it got out, but we doubt if anyone who picked it up will have understood much of it. And if they do, Underhill gave a little "what can you do" shrug. It's still going on. The voices appear to be real. The new voice print comparisons that were run are identical. Whatever else they are, these guys could put Rich Little out of business. The whoop 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 of the helicopters came clearly through the walls. Kurtz could feel it as well as hear it. Through the boards, through the OSHA poster, and from there into the grey meat that was mostly water, telling him to come on, come on, come on, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. His blood responded to it, but he sat quietly looking at Owen Underhill. Thinking about Owen Underhill. Make haste slowly, that was useful saying, especially when dealing with folks like Owen. "How's your groin, indeed?" "You fucked me with one's buck," Kurtz thought. "Maybe it didn't cross my line, but by God, you scuffed at it, didn't you?" "Yes, I think so, and I think you will bear watching." "Same 4 messages over and over," Underhill said, and ticked them off on the fingers of his left hand. "Don't hurt us. We are helpless. There is no infection here." The last one, "No infection," Kurtz mused. "Ha! They got the nerve, don't they?" He had seen pictures of reddish gold fuzz growing on all the trees around Blue Boy, and on people, corpses mostly, at least so far. The techs have named it Ripley fungus, after the tough broad Sigourney Weaver had played in those space movies. Most of them were too young to remember the other Ripley, who had done the Believe It or Not feature in the newspapers. Believe It or Not was pretty much gone now, too freaky for the politically correct 21st century. But to fit this situation, Kurtz thought, oh yes, like a glove. Made old Mr. Ripley's Siamese twins and 2-headed cows look positively normal by comparison. "The last one is We Are Dying," Underhill said. "That one's interesting because there are 2 different French versions accompanying the English. The first is straightforward, the second is slangy. We might say, our goose is cooked." He looked directly at Kurtz, who wished Perlmutter were there to see that. Yes, it could be done. Are they cooked? I mean, assuming they don't help them along. Why French, Owen? Underhill shrugged. It's still the other language up here. And the prime numbers just to show we are dealing with intelligent beings? As if another kind could travel here from another star system or dimension or whatever it is they come from? I guess so. What about the flashlights, boss? Most are now down in the woods. They disintegrate fairly rapidly once they run out of juice. The ones we've been able to retrieve look like soup cans with the label stripped off. Considering their size, they put on a hell of a show, don't they? Scared the living hell out of the locals. When the flashlights disintegrated, they left patches of the fungus or ergot or whatever the hell it was behind. The same seemed true of the aliens themselves. The ones that were left were just up there standing around like commuters standing around a broken down bus, bawling that they weren't infectious. Praise the Lord and pass the biscuits. And once the stuff was on you, you were most likely, what had Owen said, a cooked goose. They didn't know that for sure. Of course, it was early yet, but they had to make the assumption. How many ETs still up there? Owen asked. Maybe 100. How much don't we know? Does anybody have any idea? Kurtz waved it aside. He was not a knower. Knowing was someone else's department, and none of those guys had been invited to this particular pre-Thanksgiving party. The survivors, Underhill persisted. Are they crew? I don't know, but probably not. Too many for crew, not enough to be colonists, nowhere near enough to be shock troops. What else is going up there, boss? Something is. Pretty sure of that, are you? Yes. Why? Underhill shrugged. Intuition? It's not intuition, Kurtz said, almost gently. It's telepathy. Say what? Low grade, but there's really not any question about it. The men sense something, but they haven't put a name on it yet. Give them a few hours and they will. Our grey friends are telepaths, and they seem to spread just like that as they spread the fungus. Holy fucking shit, Owen Underhill whispered. Kurtz sat calmly, watching him think. He liked watching people think, if they were any good at it, and now there was more. He was hearing Owen think, a faint sound like the ocean in a conch shell. The fungus isn't strong in the environment, Owen said. Neither are they. What about the ESP? 'Tis soon to tell, if it lasts though, and if it gets out of pine tree piss pot we are in, everything changes. You know that, don't you? Underhill knew. I can't believe it, he said. I'm thinking of a car, Kurtz said. What car I'm thinking of? Owen looked at him, apparently trying to decide if Kurtz was serious. He saw that Kurtz was, then shook his head. How should I, he paused. Fiat? Ferrari, actually. I'm thinking of ice cream flavor. Which? Pistachio, Owen said. There you go. Owen sat another moment, and then Kurtz, hesitantly, if Kurtz could tell him his brother's name. Kellogg, Kurtz replied. Jesus, Owen, what kind of a name is that for a kid? My mother's maiden name, Christ. Telepathy. I'm going to fuck with the ratings of Jeopardy and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I can tell you that, Kurtz said, then repeated, if it gets loose. From outside the building there came a gunshot and a scream. You didn't have to do that! Someone screamed, in a voice filled with outrage and fear. You didn't have to do that! They waited, but there was no more. The confirmed grey boy body count is 81, Kurtz said. There are probably more. Once they go down, they decompose pretty fast. Nothing left but goo, and then fungus. Throughout the zone, Kurtz shook his head. Think of a wedge pointing east. The thick end is Blue Boy. Where we are about is the middle of the wedge. There are a few more illegal immigrants of the grey persuasion wandering around east of here. The flashlights have mostly stayed around the wedge area. 80 highway patrol. It's all toast, isn't it? Owen asked. Not just the grey boys and the ship and the flashlights, the whole fucking geography. I'm not prepared to speak to that just now, Kurt said. No, Owen thought. Of course you're not. He wondered immediately if Kurtz could read his thought. There was no way of telling. Certainly not from those pale eyes. We are going to take out the rest of the grey boys, I can tell you that much. Your men will crew the gunships and your men only. You are Blue Boy leader, got that? Yes, sir. Kurtz did not correct it. In this context, and given Underhill's obvious distaste for the mission, sir was probably good. I am Blue One. Owen nodded. Kurtz got up and drew out his pocket watch. It had gone noon. This is going to get out, Underhill said. There are a lot of US citizens in the zone. There's simply no way to keep it quiet. How many of those implants? Kurtz almost smiled. The weasels, yes, too many here, and few more over the years. Underhill didn't know, but Kurtz did. Nasty little fellows they were. The one good thing about being the boss, you didn't have to answer the questions you didn't want to answer. What happens later is up to the spin doctors, he said. Our job is to react what certain people, voice of one of them is probably on your tape, have determined is a clear and present danger to the people of the United States. Got it back. Underhill looked into the pale gaze and at last looked away. One more thing, Kurt said. Do you remember the Fuka? The Irish ghost horse. Close enough when it comes to nags, that one's mine. Always has been. Some folks in Bosnia saw you riding my Fuka, didn't they? Owen chanced no reply. Kurtz didn't look put out by that, but he looked intent. I want no repeat, Owen. Silence is golden. When we ride Fuka horse, we must be invisible. Do you understand that? Yes. Perfect understanding? Yes, Owen said. He wondered again how much of his mind Kurtz could read. Certainly he could read the name currently in front of Kurtz's mind and supposed Kurtz wanted him to. Bosanski Novi. They were on the verge of going. 4 gunship crews with Owen Underhill's men from the bus, replacing the ENG guys who had brought the CH-47s this far. They were cranking up, filling the air with the thunder of the rotors, and then came Kurtz's orders to stand down. Owen passed it on, then flicked his chin to the left. He was now on Kurtz's private comm channel. Beg pardon, but what the fuck? Owen asked. If they were going to do this thing, he wanted to do it and get behind him. It was worse than Bosanski Novi, worse by far. Writing it off by saying the grey boys weren't human beings just did not wash, not for him anyway. Beings that could build something like Blue Boy or fly it at least were more than human. It's none of mine, lad, Kurd said. The weather boys in the Bangor say the shit is moving out fast. It's what they call an Alberta Clipper. 35 minutes, 45 max, and we are on our way. With our nav gear all screwed up, it's better to wait if we can. And we can. You'll thank me on the other end. Man, I doubt that. Roger, copy. He flicked his head to the right. Conklin, he said. No rank designations to be used on this mission, especially not on the radio. I'm here. Tell the men we are on hold. 30 to 45. Say again, 30 to 45. Roger that, 30 to 45. Let's have a jukebox rhythm. Okay, requests? Go on with what you like. Just save the squad anthem. Roger, squad anthem is racked back. No smile in Kong's voice. There was one man at least who liked this as little as Owen did, of course. Conklin has also been on the Bosanski Novi mission in '95. Pearl Jam started up in Owen's cans. He pulled them off and laid them around in his back like a horse collar. He didn't care for Pearl Jam, but in this bunch, he was a minority. Archie Perlmutter and his men ran back and forth like chickens with their heads cut off. Salutes were snapped, then choked off. With many of the saluters sneaking, did he see that looks at the small green scout copter in which Kurt sat, with his own cans clamped firmly in place and the copy of Derry News upraised. Kurtz looked engrossed in the paper, but Owen had an idea that the man marked every half salute, every soldier who forgot the situation and reverted to the old beast habit. Beside Kurtz in the left seat was Freddie Johnson. Johnson had been with Kurtz roughly since Noah's Ark grounded on Mount Ararat. He had also been at Bosanski, and had undoubtedly given Kurtz a full report when Kurtz himself had been forced to stay behind, unable to climb into the saddle of his beloved Fuka horse because of his groin pull. In June of 95, the Air Force had lost a scout pilot in NATO's no-fly zone near the Croatia border. The Serbs had made a very big deal of Captain Tommy Callahan's plane and would have made an even bigger one of Callahan himself if they caught him. The brass, haunted by images of the North Vietnamese gleefully parading brainwashed pilots before the international press, made recovering Tommy Callahan a priority. The searchers had been out about to give up when Callahan contacted them on a low-frequency radio band. His high school girlfriend gave him a good ID marker, and when the man on the ground was queried, he confirmed it, telling them his friends that started calling him the Pukester, following a truly memorable night of drinking in his junior year. Kurtz's boys went in and get Callahan a couple of helicopters much smaller than any of the ones they were using today. Owen Underhill, already tapped by most, including himself, Owen supposed as Kurtz's successor, had been in charge. Callahan's job was to pop some smoke when he saw the birds, then stand by. Underhill's job, the Fuka part of it, had been to yank Callahan without being seen. This was not strictly necessary so far as Owen could see, but was simply the way Kurtz liked it. His men were invisible. His men rode the Irish horse. The extraction had worked perfectly. There were some SAMs fired, but nothing even close. Milosevic had shit for the most part. It was as they were talking Callahan on board that Owen had seen only Bosnians, 5 or 6 children, oldest to no more than 10, watching them with solemn faces. The idea that Kurtz's directive to make sure there were no witnesses might apply to a group of dirty-faced kids had never crossed Owen's mind, and Kurtz had never said anything about it. Until today, that was. That Kurtz was a terrible man, Owen had no doubt. Yet there were many terrible men in the service, more devils than saints, most certainly, and they were in love with secrecy. That made Kurtz different. What made Kurtz different, Owen had no idea. Kurtz, that long and melancholy man with his white eyelashes and still eyes, meeting those was hard because there was nothing in them, no love, no laughter, and absolutely no curiosity. That lack of curiosity was somehow the worst. A battered Subaru pulled up at the store, and 2 men got carefully out. One clutched a black cane in a weather-chapped hand. Both wore red and black checked hunting overshirts. Both wore faded caps, one with case above the bill and the other with deer. They looked wonderingly at the contingent of soldiers that descended upon them. Soldiers at Gosselin's? What in the tarnal? They were in their 80s by the look of them, but they had the curiosity Kurtz lacked. You could see it in the set of their bodies, the tilt of their heads. All the questions Kurtz had not voiced. What do they want? Do they really mean us harm? Will doing this bring the harm? Is it the wind we sow to bring the whirlwind? What was there in all that previous encounters? The flaps, the flashlights, the falls of angel hair and red dust, the abductions that began in the late 60s,
that has made the powers that made so afraid? Has there been any real effort to communicate with these creatures? And the last question, the most important question, were the grey boys like us? Were they by any definition human? Was this murder pure and simple? No question in Kurtz's eyes about that either. The snow lightened, the day brightened, and exactly 30 minutes after ordering the stand down, Kurtz gave them a go. Owen relayed it to Conklin, and the chinnies revved hard again, pulled up gauzy wheels of snow and turning themselves into momentary ghosts. Then they rose to the treetop level, aligned themselves on Underhill, Blue Boy leader, and flew west to the direction of Kineo. Kurtz's Kiowa 58 flew below them and slightly to starboard, and Owen thought briefly of the troops of soldiers in a John Wayne movie. Blue Legs with a single Indian scout riding his pony bareback off to one side. He couldn't see, but Kurtz would still be reading the paper. Maybe his horoscope. Pisces, this is your day of infamy. Stay in bed. The pines and spruces below appeared and disappeared in vapors of white. Snow flew against the Chinooks, 2 front windows, danced, disappeared. The ride was extremely rough, like a ride in a washing machine, and Owen wouldn't have had it any other way. He clapped the cans back to his head. Some other group, maybe Matchbox 20, not great, but better than Pearl Jam. What Owen dreaded was the squad anthem, but he would listen. Yes, indeed, he would listen. In and out of the low clouds, vapory glimpses of an apparently endless forest. West, west, west. Blue Boy leader, this is Blue 2. Roger 2. I have visual contact with Blue Boy, confirm. For a moment, Owen couldn't, and then he could. What he saw took his breath away. A photograph, an image inside a border, a thing you could hold in your hand. That was one thing. This was something else entirely. Confirm 2, Blue Group, this is Blue Boy leader. Hold your current positions. I say again, hold your current positions. One by one, the other copters rogered. Only Kurtz did not, but he also stayed put. The Chinooks and the Kiowa hung in the air, perhaps 3/4 of a mile from the downed spacecraft. Leading up to it was an enormous sward of trees that were whacked off in a slanted lane, as if by an enormous hedge clipper. At the end of this lane was a swampy area. Dead trees clutched at the white sky as if to snatch the clouds open. There were zigzags of melting snow, some of it turning yellow, where it was oozing into damp ground. In other places, there were veins and capillaries of open black water. The ship, an enormous grey plate, nearly 1/4 of a mile across, had torn through the dead trees at the center of the swamp, exploding them and casting the splintery fragments in every direction. The Blue Boy, it was not blue at all, not a bit blue, had come to rest at the swamp's far end, where the rocky ridge rose at a steep angle. A long arc of its curved edge had disappeared into the watery, unstable earth. Dirt and bits of broken trees had sprayed up and littered. Dirt and bits of broken trees had sprayed up and littered the ship's smooth hull. The surviving grey boys were standing around it, most on snow-covered hummocks, under the upward tilted end of their ship. If the sun had been shining, they would be standing in the crashed ship's shadow. Well, clearly there was someone who thought it was more Trojan horse than crashed ship. But the surviving grey boys, naked and unarmed, didn't look like much of a threat. About 100, Kurtz had said, but there were fewer than that now. Owen put a number at 60. He saw at least a dozen corpses, in greater or lesser states of red-tinged decay, lying on the snow-covered hummocks. Some were face down in the shallow black water. Here and there, startlingly bright against the snow, were reddish gold patches of the so-called Ripley fungus. Except not all of the patches were bright. Owen realized as he raised his binoculars and looked through them. Several had begun to grey out, victims of the cold or the atmosphere or both. No, they didn't survive well here, not the grey boys, not the fungus they had brought with them. Could this stuff actually spread? He just didn't believe it. "Blue boy leader?" Conk asked. "You there, boy?" "I'm here. Shut up a minute." Owen leaned forward, reached under the pilot's elbow, Tony Edwards, a good man, and flicked the radio switch to common channel. Kurtz's mention of Bosanski, Norway, never crossed his mind. The idea that he was making a terrible mistake never crossed his mind. The idea that he might have seriously underestimated Kurtz's lunacy never crossed his mind. In fact, he did what he did with almost no conscious thought at all. So it seemed to him later, when he cast his mind back and re-examined the incident not just once but again and again. Only a flip of the switch, that was all it took to change the course of man's life, it seemed. And there it was, loud and clear. A voice none of Kurt's laddie bucks would recognize. They knew Eddie Vedder. Walter Cronkite was a different deal. 2 seconds and then a voice that might have been belonged to Barbara Streisand. 113, 117, 119. At some point, Owen realized they had started over counting primes from 1. On the way up to Goslin's in the bus, the various voices had reached primes in the high 4 figures. "We are dying," said the voice of Barbara Streisand. A pause, then the voice of David Letterman. 127, 100. "Belay that," Kurtz cried. For the only time in the years Owen had known him, Kurtz sounded really upset, almost shocked. "Owen, why do you want to run that filth into the ears of my boys? You come back and tell me, and right now." "Just wanted to hear if any of it has changed, boss." That was a lie. And of course, Kurtz knew it, and at some point would undoubtedly make him pay for it. It was failing to shoot the kids all over again, maybe even worse. Owen didn't care. Fuck the Fuka horse. They were going to do this. They wanted Kurtz's boys, Skyhook and Bosnia. Some other name next time, but it always came back to the same hard young faces. To hear the Grey Boys one last time, travelers from other star system, perhaps even other universe or time stream, knowers of things their hosts would never know. Not that Kurtz would care. Let them hear the Grey Boys one last time instead of Pearl Jam or Jar of Flies or Raging as the Machine. The Grey Boys appealing to what they had foolishly hoped was some better nature. "And has it changed?" Kurtz's voice crackled back. The green Kiowa was still down there, just below the hanging line of gunships, its rotors beating at the split top of a tall old pine just under it, making it ruffle and sway. "Has it, Owen?" "No," he said. "Not at all, boss." "Then belay that chatter. Daylight's wasting, praise Jesus." Owen paused and then said with careful deliberation, "Yes, sir." Kurtz sat bolt upright in the Kiowa's right seat. Ramrod straight was how they always put it in the books and movies. He had donned his sunglasses in spite of day's mild grey light. But Freddie, his pilot, still only dared to look at him from the corners of his eyes. The sunglasses were wraparounds, hipster whodaddy shades, and now they were on. You couldn't tell where the boss was looking. You certainly couldn't trust the way his head was pointing. The Derry News lay on Kurtz's lap. Mysterious skylights, missing hunters, spark panic in Jefferson Tract. I read the headline. Now he picked up the paper and folded it carefully. He was good at this, and soon the Derry News would be folded into what Owen Underhill's career had just become: a cocked hat. Underhill no doubt thought he would face some sort of disciplinary action, Kurtz's own, since there was Black Ops deal, at least so far, followed by a second chance. What he didn't seem to realize, and that was probably good, unwarned usually meant unarmed. And what was this had been his second chance, which was more than Kurtz had ever given anyone else, and one he now regretted, bitterly regretted. For Owen to go and pull a trick like that after their conversation in the office of the store, after he had been specifically warned.
Who gives the order?" Underhill's voice cracked in Kurtz's private comlink. Kurtz was surprised and a little dismayed by the depth of his rage. Most of it was caused by no more than surprise, the simplest emotion, the one babies registered before any other. Owen had zinged him a good one. Putting the Grey Boys on the squad channel like that, just wanted to hear any of it had changed indeed. And that was one you could roll tight and stick up your ass. Owen was probably the best second Kurtz had ever had in a long and complicated career that stretched all the way back to Cambodia in the early 70s. But Kurtz was going to break him just the same. For the trick with the radio, because Owen hadn't learned. It wasn't about kids in Bosanski, Norway, or a bunch of babbling voices now. It wasn't about following orders or even the principle of the matter. It was about the line. His line. The Kurtz line. Also, there was that sir. That damned, snotty sir. "Boss?" Owen sounded a tad nervous now, and he was right to sound nervous. Jesus love him. Who gives? "Common channel, Freddy," Kurtz said. "Key me in." The Kiowa, much lighter than the gunships, caught a gust of wind and took a giddy bounce. Kurtz and Freddy ignored it. Freddy keyed him wide. "Listen up, boys," Kurtz said, looking at the 4 gunships hanging in the line, glass dragonflies above the trees and beneath the clouds. Just ahead of them was the swamp and the vast, pearlescent tilted dish with its surviving crew or whatever they were, standing beneath its aft lip. "Listen now, boys. Daddy's gonna sermonize. Are you listening? Answer up." "Yes, yes. Affirmative. Affirm. Roger that." With an occasional stir thrown in, but that was all right. That was the difference between forgetfulness and insolence. "I'm not a talker, boys. Talking's not what I do, but I want you to know this is not what you see as 6 dozen grey, apparently unsexed humanoids standing around naked as loving God made them, and you say, some would say anyway, why those poor folks, all naked and unarmed, not a cock or cunt to share among them, pleading for mercy there by their crashed intergalactic trailways, and what kind of a dog, what kind of a monster could hear those pleading voices and going just the same? And I have to tell you, boys, I am that dog. I am that monster. I am that post-industrial, post-modern, crypto-fascist, politically incorrect, metal cockorocker war pig. Praise Jesus, and for anyone listening, I am Abraham Peter Kurtz, USAF retired, serial number 241771699. And I'm leading this charge. I'm Lieutenant Cally in the charge of this particular Alice's Restaurant Massacre. He took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the hovering helicopters. "But fellas, I have to tell you that the Grey Boys have been messing with us since the late 1940s, and I've been messing with them since the late 1970s. And I can tell you, just because a fellow comes walking toward you with his hands raised, saying, 'I surrender,' that doesn't mean, praise Jesus, that he doesn't have a pint of nitroglycerine shoved up his ass. Now, the big old smart goldfish who goes swimming around in these think tanks, most of you guys say the Grey Boys, came when we started lighting off atomic and hydrogen bombs, and that they came to that the way bugs come to a bug light. I don't know about that. I'm not a thinker. I leave the thinking to others. Leave it to the cabbage. Cabbage got the head on him, as the saying goes, but there's nothing wrong with my eyes, fellas. And I tell you, those Grey Boys, son of a bitches, are as harmless as wolf in a henhouse. We have taken a good many of them over the years, but not one has lived. When they die, their corpses decompose rapidly and turn into exactly the sort of stuff you see down there, what you lads call Ripley fungus. Sometimes they explode. Got that? They explode. The fungus they carry, or maybe it's the fungus that's in charge. Some of the think tank goldfish believe that might be the case, dies easily enough unless it gets on the living host. I say again, living host, and the host it seems to like the best. Fellas, praise Jesus, is old Homo sap. Once you've got it so much as under the nail of your little finger, it's Katie bar the door and Homer run for home. This was not precisely the truth. Not precisely anywhere near the truth, as a matter of fact, but nobody fought for you as ferociously as a scared soldier. This Kurds knew from experience.